Climate change is an existential crisis which threatens the entire globe. With more countries progressing in their development, we're bound to increase the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. Pollution and overharvesting of natural resources cause destruction of habitats and biodiversity, which is crucial to a healthy environment. This raises the question as to who's responsible. We see much of the first world as relatively inconsequential in regards to their emissions, which is because they exported their manufacturing to the global south. The most impactful developed nations that remain major emitters are China and the United States. The main factor contributing to China's massive amount of emissions stems from their deep reliance on coal for energy, making up about 60% of their domestic energy production. While they vow to stop the expansion of the coal power industry, they built 14 more plants abroad. China has an ever-receding water supply from the polluting of their waters from the industrial and waste sectors, and are the largest contributors to ocean plastics, dumping over 70 million kilograms into the ocean. This has resulted in roughly 90% of their groundwater becoming undrinkable. The Chinese economy is heavily dependent on the real estate industry, which makes up about a third of their economy. This has led to a massive consumption of concrete, so much so that half the world's concrete is used by China. China has depleted their coastal waters of fish, destroying the food chain and making it impossible to commercially fish. This has led to China building a massive fishing fleet, which they use to illegally fish in other countries' waters. In doing so, they make any other country's attempts at sustainably fishing and protecting their local ecosystems useless. However, China has attempted to aid in climate change under pressure from the rest of the world. China has dedicated $83 billion to green energy, being the leader in green energy production. They have historically been the leader in hydroelectric by vast margins, and they have plenty of room to expand. They have increased their focuses on solar and wind, changing them from making about 2.06% of their power production to 11.8% of their power production between 2012 and 2021. China's massive demand for timber originally caused them to rapidly log their forests, but they banned commercial logging of their natural forests in 2016, effectively eliminating deforestation in China. The United States, being the second largest polluter in the world, uses 11.91 million barrels of oil per day, with 67% of America's petroleum usage being dedicated to transportation. America has been an industrial giant since 1865, pumping CO2 into the atmosphere for 157 years. The bulk of the 509 cumulative gigatons of CO2 comes from their coal usage, which was the primary source of energy production up until 2005. While America has multiple institutions to help to protect their environment, it has been incapable of stopping pollution of waterways from fertilizer, which causes algal blooms. These algal blooms have deadly biotoxins and consume the dissolved oxygen in the water, creating dead zones and harming the local ecosystems. The U.S. has been steadily reducing their CO2 emissions, reducing about 1% yearly since 2005. A big part of this was from the shifting from coal to natural gas, which yields about 50% less emissions. The United States is second in green energy production, making about 20% of the energy production. Historically, the U.S. has been the leader in green energy technology, inventing and innovating solar, wind, and nuclear. A new development of green technology being carbon capture and storage, which America has 3 of the top 10 carbon capture companies. The United States greatly values its environment, making 235 million acres protected wildlands, and has made many laws to stop deforestation domestically and discourage it abroad. Many developing nations are just as responsible for their part. Indonesia and Brazil are deforesting their lands rapidly. Brazil has had rapid deforestation due to their need for local farmland, urban development, and the record large forest fires. Indonesia has just under half of its rainforest left from deforestation, being caused by the agricultural harvesting of the rainforest. These countries impact CO2 emissions due to their large forests, which collectively absorb 7.6 billion metric tons of CO2 per year. While they currently produce relatively low amounts of emissions, they are developing into industrial economies, with Brazil being primarily powered by coal and Brazil by oil. These countries are some of the many developing nations that have had the dirty industries exported to them by the First World for cheap labor. The solution to the problem is for the world to progress towards net zero carbon emissions, but who should be responsible for making this change? All developed nations should come together, much like in the Paris Agreement, to provide assistance to developing nations in renewable energy sources and to help them transition to green energy as efficiently as possible. Their bills should be directly based on their cumulative contribution to global emissions and local impacts on pollution. China and America are by far too large of contributors to not be held responsible for climate change. Both countries must shift their electrical sources to renewable energy, with their fossil fuels being used to keep lights on in case of energy crisis like in Germany. The United States needs to invest in electrical transportation systems to help combat the amount of petroleum used to help for transportation. However, nations that provided the world with technology to help fight climate change should be compensated for that and their debt being reduced. Developing nations shouldn't be held to the same standard as developed nations who have already become rich enough to support their countries for the switch. However, they should be held responsible if they continue to pollute after receiving the aid.